And now it's my pleasure to introduce Thomas Frank from the University of Uppsala. Thomas, the floor is yours. Thank you.
All right. Nice to be here. My name is Thomas Frank. I'm a PhD candidate at Uppsala University in Sweden. And first of all, I need to apologize a bit for the sparseness of my slides. I cannot keep up with Jimena's, but this is because I lost my laptop actually on the way here to Oslo. Not to Oslo, from Oslo to here. But yeah. So I want to share a bit my story or my interest in the field of glaciology, why I came here. And I want to do that sort of by looking back in history into the great age of polar exploration, which is the end of the 19th century and the start of the 20th century. So I'm going to talk about a Swedish polar expedition which had the goal to be the first ones to conquer the North Pole. So this is in 1896. And there were 3 Swedish guys that set out, and nobody had been to the North Pole before. And part of that was because there is no continent on the North Pole. It's only like the ocean, but it's of course frozen. So you cannot sail there. You need to walk, and you need to walk over sea ice. And if you've ever seen sea ice, it's not anything like a lake ice. It's full of like ridges and individual ice flakes. So it's super hard to actually get there. So these guys actually had the brilliant idea, you could say, to use an air balloon to fly to the North Pole, and thereby being the first ones to actually cross the North Pole and come out somewhere on the other side. So they set off from Svalbard, which is like a small archipelago about halfway between Norway and the North Pole. So you are pretty close already to the North Pole if you start from there. And they wanted to fly there. The thing is, they were driven by the spirit of the time. And the spirit of the time was conquering the North Pole, being the first nation to be up there. And it was not always accompanied by the necessary caution or planning that you need to do for such an expedition. So there were several things that they didn't really take into account or that they were very optimistic about. So one is, if you want to sail in an air balloon from somewhere south of the North Pole to the North Pole, you always need the same wind direction. So they were assuming that they would always get the wind blowing from the south when they were sailing to the North Pole. And they thought about it to some degree in that they employed these ropes onto their balloon. So these ropes would drag over the sea ice and thereby allowing them to sort of control the direction that they were going. But this is only like it had never been tried before, and it had never worked before. Also, they were rather optimistic about how long they would have to fly. So they had calculated that it would take about 30 days to sail from Svalbard over the North Pole to the other side, Alaska, Russia, Canada. But until that day, nobody had been in the air with an air balloon for more than 1 day. And this is because these air balloons, they're leaking gas while they're flying. So they were hoping to get a better balloon that leaks less gas, but they'd never tried it before. And finally, the 3 guys, they were no polar expedition people. They were office people. They had been sitting in offices in Stockholm and worked in different jobs, but only one of them had been to the Arctic ever before, and only for a short time. So they were all in all, they were pretty unprepared and very optimistic about the adventure, and mostly driven by the fame and the interest in the Arctic areas. In the first year, in 1896, they went up to Svalbard, set up their whole station to fill up this balloon and all that, and they're waiting for southerly winds, but nothing happened. Today, actually, we know that the place where they set off, it's known to have northerly winds. So another aspect that they didn't know or didn't take into account. So they had to come back to Sweden in the first year, and that was quite a disappointment because this expedition had been accompanied by a lot of media attention, that they needed a huge amount of funding to do this expedition, and they had gotten it. But also the expectations were large, of course. So they came back after first years. The expectations were building up. And so they went back the next year to try it again. And indeed, they were lucky. One day in June, the wind actually blew from the south. They set up the whole station, the whole balloon, went in and got off. The problem is, already at the start, they were facing huge problems because the balloon was approaching the water surface. They had to drop off a lot of weight. And within these whole problems, these ropes that were attached to the balloon got lost. So they were sitting there in the balloon with no control on where they're going and overall little experience. Also, they had underestimated the challenges of polar weather in the summer. They had thought, it's the Arctic area, it's going to be cold. If it snows, it's fine. Snow is light. If it falls on the balloon, it won't impact us so much. But in fact, the Arctic summer is very moist. It can rain as well. So what happened is that rime was settling on the balloon more and more, and it actually got super heavy. And after 2 days in the air, they crashed on the sea ice, and that's where they were. So this is the three of them in their balloon, somewhere between Svalbard and the North Pole. They didn't know exactly where they were. They didn't have proper equipment, and they didn't have any hope anymore to reach the North Pole. They knew their adventure was failed, but all they could hope for was basically to survive and make their way back home to Svalbard. Due to their lack of preparation, however, they also really hadn't thought about, or not properly thought about, how they would behave in such an emergency. They had taken with them some sledges and a little boat, but also they didn't take into account the knowledge of maybe indigenous people, Inuit people, how to build such sledges. So they had built sledges that were super heavy, very hard to handle on these sea ice conditions in the Arctic. There's many more things to say about this expedition, and most of them went wrong. But in the end, they ended up on a little island north. Oh, one thing that is also interesting to talk about is that they were trying to get south, obviously, towards Svalbard. But while they were going south, the sea ice was drifting north. So on some days, they were actually going backwards. Yes, but eventually they made it to this little island called Vidön, which is somewhere northeast of Svalbard. And nobody had probably been there before. It's just a little island with a huge glacier on it and a little beach. And they set camp there. And we know all this because they noted it down in the diary. But at this point, they set the camp, they noted down, we're doing well, we're doing good. But the next day, all entries in the diary end. So, of course, people back then didn't have these diaries. And nothing was known about what had happened to this expedition. And then actually nothing was known for 33 years when they were found just by accident. And they were dead. Now, many theories have come forward why they've died, and it's and it hasn't fully been resolved until today, but it probably has to do something with polar bears and starvation. But the point that I want to make with this story and why I'm telling this whole thing has to do with the next. Oh, no, sorry. So this is, when they were found, not in a super good shape. So this now brings me to my point why I'm telling this whole story. Because they were found, they were dead, they had been gone for 33 years. And yet, when they were brought back to Stockholm, their dead bodies, they were received by a huge crowd, tens of thousands of people. The king was there, cannon shots were fired. You see this whole parade going to the graveyard. And to me, and that is why, and this shows to me also, or this is related to why I'm in this field. Because it shows to me how fascinating these polar areas are for us. They were gone for 33 years, and yet they were received back, and everybody was interested in that. And that is also, that is my motivation in this field as well, that I'm just fascinated by these vast areas, these landscapes, these extremes, and this cold. So this is, long story short, this is why I'm in this field. And so this is me looking up on the down on Svalbard. Now, I mentioned that I went into this field because I'm just interested in these areas and and this field in general. But it's now sort of an interesting shift that has occurred to the field and to me personally, because this field has long been just driven by curiosity and the interest in the Earth system, how everything works, why we get these extreme areas on the poles, and at the same time we have an area on the globe that's the tropics, that's so much warmer and all that. So this has been interesting to me and to the many researchers in the field. But all of a sudden, this field has sort of ended up in the center of our future. It has become like the focal point of nothing less than the faith of humanity. And this is, one could almost call it like a tragic change of events, or that people wouldn't have foreseen, especially not me when I started in this field. I was just interested in everything. So much for my journey in this field. Now I'm going to briefly talk about my PhD topic. It's not so much because I've started a half a year ago, so I cannot share so many results yet, but I want to show you what it's about. So this is another glacier on Svalbard. I talk a lot about Svalbard here. And we can look at it from above. We can assess all sorts of characteristics. We can measure how much snow it gains every year, how much snow is lost every year. However, there's one thing that's not so easy to observe, and this is how thick is actually the glacier. Because there's no device where we can just, kind of look through the glacier, make the glacier invisible. We could, for example, drag a radar, a ground-penetrating radar, that's what it's called. So that's a device that you can drag on the sledge behind you, and it sends out an electromagnetic waves, and it receives the signal back, and then you know how thick the glacier is at this specific point. But there's no device that can look through the glacier on a larger scale. So my PhD project is about looking through the glacier, but not with a technical device, but by using computer algorithms and ice flow modeling, so the principles of ice flow. So down on the map here, you see all the glaciers in the world, where they are located in blue, and you see their size indicated by the circles, or the overall area distribution. And so my project is about making use of satellite data, making use of ground observations, and making use of these computer models that have the physics of ice flow inside them to derive how thick the glacier is. So, for example, you can see this here. We have a satellite image on the left-hand side. So this is the same glacier, just looking at it from space. And then we run our algorithm, and all of a sudden, we can actually find out how thick this glacier is. And we get this proper map everywhere we know how thick it is. And thereby then also where the bed is. So we've actually looked through the glacier, and by doing so, we also know the volume of the glacier. So we know how much ice is actually stored in this specific ice body. So my project is about investigating this, not only for this glaciers, but actually for all the glaciers in the world. So there's more than 200,000 glaciers in the world, and my project wants to estimate how much ice is stored in them, and thereby derive a new estimate of how much ice also can be lost as the climate is now warming and these glaciers are melting. So finishing off with this picture, and if you have any questions, please come forward.
Hi, I was just wondering how accurate is the algorithm you've used? Have you tied it into many points where you've used radar, or have you just got a few?
Yes, so this specific glacier is it's super well monitored. So we know quite a lot about how thick it is from these radar measurements, and we've validated against these measurements, and we will do that for as many glaciers as possible. So that's why we need the ground observations.
Hi, I thought that was really interesting. Thank you. And him in the talk was really good as well. Really inspiring. I'm in the field of glaciology, radar glaciology as well. So that really interested me. But I think what interested me even more is the start, how you were telling that story. And in a way, you almost touched to that metaphor of these sort of rich white guys, middle-aged, sort of office people just going into an area that they don't know really much about. It's quite dangerous, quite unpredictable, and trying to sort of do something that nobody's ever done without actually talking to the Inuits or to the indigenous people to ask them a little bit about their experience and understanding how they do it in the field. And I think that kind of is applicable to what's happening here at COP, but also what's happening in just in general with Western societies and climate change. I think it was a nice metaphor, a nice link between the two. So I just wanted to say that was great, inspiring, and thank you also for him, and that was really good as well. Thank you.
Thanks.
Actually exactly the same comment. I had just put it another way. If you would allow us to interpret it in the way that those three guys are kind of an analogy to the policymakers and decision makers of today. So we are on the same. We got the same message. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any more questions or comments? Yes, please.
Hi there, great presentation. I just wanted to ask if you think that we're moving away from, I guess, this area of exploration towards an area of conservation. So do you think that now, after the pandemic, that we'll have less of these kind of explorations and tourism that's not necessarily done in a sustainable way?
I mean, I certainly wish I could say so, but my personal impression is not so much. Especially like Arctic tourism is becoming more and more popular. In Svalbard, actually, they're building like a new harbor so that more cruise ships can arrive, like a new terminal. And I think the same is also happening in Antarctica. So in that sense, not, even though, of course, awareness is also increasing for nature conservation, and especially Svalbard is actually a good example for that, because large parts of the island are preserved and are like a national park. Yeah, but I don't know if there's a proper trend across everywhere, but that's just my personal view. Okay, any more questions? Perfect, thank you.
Thank you for another great talk this morning. I think what a great way to introduce science through storytelling, fantastic stories of exploration. And your work is also extremely relevant. We probably know more about the surface of the moon than what's happening underneath these glaciers. So really cool project, and wishing you good luck with your PhD project. We'll continue with the presentations from our early career scientists, starting at 1 p.m. for the next round. Thank you so much. See you in a bit.